And just to kind of start off, for those who may not know who you are, could you give us like a small background of who you are a little bit?
Yeah, I'm a electronic music artist. I go by the name the DayDream Sound from Toronto, Canada. And basically, what I make is instrumental trip hop, instrumental future beats, film score type music. That's about all I can say.
All right. Well, for those who don't know, you dropped your album, which you call the DayDream Sound 2, the passage to Alkebulan. If I'm, tell me if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
That is exactly correct. Yeah,
It's been about a month or a little bit over a month now, right?
yeah. It dropped on the 21st of March, so we're just going on just over a month.
How are you looking back at that album in retrospect now that you kind of have a little bit of distance away from it?
I listened to it quite a bit while making it, and I actually went back to listen to it sometime this week, and I like it. I like it a lot better than I did when I was making it. My main concern was how it would be received, and it's the type of thing where I end up playing it and just having it repeat over and over and over again, and I don't seem to get tired with it. So I'm really happy with with how it was received and how it was turned out. And in my eyes, usually once I'm done with something, I really don't visit it often. But in this case, it's been the opposite.
Okay. So I guess I should ask is that because it sounds like you had a couple of goals in mind with this album a little bit, or even it seems like this album kind of exceeded some of your goals or your usual expectations of your album. What were your goals, and were you able to accomplish them? And what other ways were you kind of surprised by what you made for yourself?
The main goal for this album was just to really put more of my music out there, and it's something that I haven't been doing lately. Even my last album was 2011, and it's now 2013. And generally putting out an album or two a year is a good schedule to keep on, and I've just haven't been doing that. So this time around, my goal was really to put myself out there, and it's been exceeding my goals in the sense that it's been getting recognition that I didn't think it would get. The internet is such a big place that if you put something out nowadays, it comes in, and the next day it's gone. So in this sense, it's been sticking out there. It's still going on, and I'm completely satisfied with that.
Okay. So the way that I've been trying to figure out how would I describe this album for people who haven't heard it, the way I kind of went through, and I'm curious to see what you think, is that it almost feels like a factory work with all the kind of clanks and unorthodox sounds and kind of uneasy grooves, and it has almost like ghastly winds and going on. What was it like to kind of create that soundscape?
It was that's more of me. That's usually what I do, and to create stuff like that, I think you just pretty much have to start off by being yourself and not being afraid or concerned about um, any type of exterior opinions or anything like that. So in doing that, it's really an introspective album in the sense that you the sounds that you make are the things that initially the way they sound in your head, and you don't try to clean them up. You don't try to present them in a more presentable way or a more acceptable way. You just do whatever comes out at that moment, and if you like it, you leave it. And I think with your assessment of that, and that's a factory, especially with the construction of the robot, that's exactly what's happening. You have two little children building a robot, and that's exactly what it would sound like in my mind.
Okay. In fact, you kind of touched upon what I kind of wanted to get into next, which is that obviously, and it seems like it's also the same thing with the DayDream Sound 1, you tend to pair these albums with some type of ebook or books overall for the listener to engage in. So what was kind of how complementary are they to each other? Because I know reading through the book, you mentioned that you pretty much made the songs first, then you kind of went through the writing process. So how complementary are they to one another?
They're very complimentary. The Daydream Sound 2 is really an extension of the Daydream Sound 1, and specifically the artwork for the Daydream Sound 1. So the music was created ahead of the story, but it wasn't created ahead of the artwork. So the artwork for the second album and the first album, I had well in advance of the actual story being written. So as I was making the album, I had a story in my mind, but it got dialed in a little bit more when the writing process began, which ran concurrently in the later months of just final production. Then I can go back and sort of add things a little bit more of how to tie the two together. So they're very, very tightly woven.
Okay, so I listened to the album a couple of times. I kind of went through different listening processes. I'm not sure what you had intended for the listener, so I can say that I first just listened to the project as a whole, then I spent time listening to the project while reading, and then I listened to the project after reading. That's kind of the idea of how did you want listeners exactly to engage the album, or which is the most ideal way to engage the album.
I thought that would happen. I think that you would. I think the natural process in my mind, the way I saw it being received, was people would hear it, just the audio, as it's presented on the internet, and after purchasing, they would do that. They would read the story and then go back and listen again and say, okay, well, how does this fit into the story? Because the titles, are congruent with chapters in the book, and they make reference to certain things that are happening. So in going back, I wanted the listener to connect it to and see how the sounds and how the feelings and everything that was being brought across in the music related to the story. Okay. And at that point, it would be a different experience for everybody.
So it's pretty much a very evolving experience throughout, and almost kind of gets you to, at the very least, for the listener to always go back to it and reflect.
Yeah, that was the plan.
And another thing I kind of tried to figure out, so as you highlighted, is that you have 5 chapters in the book and there's 5 songs, so you know that they sync up. What I wasn't sure of is that I tried to read each chapter within each beat. So I was trying to figure out, okay, as soon as if I finish this a little bit too early, do I just let the instrumental play on and then wait for the next one and then start over, or is it okay if they overlap? I wasn't sure, because it almost seemed that because of how the chapters were laid out, but for quote unquote average reading speed, you probably by the time you finish reading the chapter, the song would be almost over. I don't know if you kind of planned it to be that exact.
No. This is the type of album that you can literally just let play on repeat. And it's multi-purpose in the sense that, some of the feedback I've been getting back, which has been the same amongst different people, is that they listen to this album while writing, while just doing things, because it's not intrusive. It's something that will sit with you and keep you company, but it won't distract what you're doing. I find myself like I can just be sitting down and the album will be playing and I'll still be enjoying it. But it's like a good friend that you can have over to your house and you two know each other so well that you don't necessarily have to have a conversation, but the company is so, so comforting that it's enjoyable. And so in going back to the story now, you could let the album play and go back if you feel like it's something that you can jump around. It's more, if you're having an experience where you're reading, you could always go back and listen for certain things.
Okay. And something else that kind of came to my mind, you were kind enough to show me the video for Offensive Escape, which for the guys who are listening, I'll try to put a link in the video. And I was pretty in awe of how great the video is. And
Thank you.
Definitely. And I wanted to ask you that, obviously, because this is a shorter instrumental project, I was curious as to why you ended up kind of just giving us one slice of the story, especially because of how you packaged the entire album, as opposed to giving us videos for all the tracks in question.
Oh, there just might be. there just might be more.
Okay.
Yeah. I wanted to start off with the most exciting part. To be honest, and the Offensive Escape video, as far as the story goes, seems like the most. It's just before the climax, but it's a real action scene in the book, and it tells a lot, and it draws you into what the rest of the story is about. So it drops you right, mid-speed enough that you can go back and find out, and there's still a little bit more left at the end to find out. So that's why we let off with that. But there just might be more.
Oh, I'm looking forward to see what else you can do with that. And I don't know, maybe I read a little bit in too much into it, but just looking through that video and just seeing the actual action scene described, I was like, is there a little bit of anime influence into that video at all, or am I just imagining things a little bit?
So is there a little bit of anime?
The anime influence a little bit, or is I just seeing things a little bit?
I'm not really an anime type of person,
Right.
but I'm getting into it. I recently been watching quite a bit of anime, and of course, when you're doing an anime project or something that's animated, you tend to just look at other references to see how yours stands up and stuff like that. But the the team that I work with is heavily into anime way
Okay.
more than I am, so their influence definitely rubs off on me and the whole creative process.
Okay. And I'm almost going to start getting into kind of the meat of some ideas from the story. But
Mhm.
even before we get into that, obviously, you, as you said, you gave us a book, and I was like, also another way of communicating the story. But I was wondering if you guys debated and decided that this would be good. Is that even you narrating some of the stuff over the instrumentals? And I was wondering, in terms of what did you think about that? Was that even an idea that you guys engaged with as a group, or you thought that would distract from the album, or
It
what?
was. It was. Initially, I wanted to have pieces narrated or interludes narrated and stuff like that. The thing with instrumental is, at least in my experience, I know when I buy or I listen to an instrumental project, one of my biggest pet peeves is you'll be listening to maybe 5 or 6 songs, and all of a sudden there's this song that's a vocal song, and it really takes away from that experience because you're just not hearing a human voice or any voice that's actually involved in speaking a language. You might hear vocal samples and things like that, and that always disturbs me. So I find when I approach instrumental music now, I try my best and been successful so far in not putting any vocal in there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's kind of dig a little bit into the story. I'll try to leave a little bits and pieces so that for people feel enticed still to go into it.
Yes.
But as you described at the beginning, is that the twins pretty much create this, I guess, create this robot, and
Yes.
essentially by creating this robot, they're kind of the intended heroes of the project. And obviously, they're sending off to go take something from an island. I was kind of curious as to this kind. I was thinking of, okay, they're obviously being these heroes, but they're kind of invading an island, and almost feels like, are they really heroes for doing that? And I wasn't sure where you kind of, if you kind of left that off for the listener to kind of interpret, or you had any purpose behind
It's
that.
definitely open to interpretation. And these stories that are written are parts of a larger story. So what we are seeing when we listen and read Passage to Alkebulan is a story. And what also may change in the future is whose point of view we're reading from. So you'll notice the narrator of the story is never really identified. We don't know who's telling the story, but we do know that's being recalled.
Right.
So as far as which point of view is it's coming from and who is a hero or non-hero is a matter of perspective, and it's definitely intentional in leaving that open.
Okay. And obviously, as we talk about the story, you also list here Devin Elizabeth as a person who helped you kind of construct the story. What was the collaboration process like? Because you described that you had the story in your mind already going in.
Yes. Devin is a writer in Toronto, and she's very good at grasping stories in this type of sense. And this is the type of story I wanted a book that's something a child could read. Initially, when I came to her, I said, this is something I want to be a bedtime story. That's something that you can read to your children. So I don't want it to be, in any way too adult-like, but at the same time, an adult could read it and have the same enjoyment. And I knew we were onto something when I got the first draft from her, and I gave it to a good friend of mine, and he read it to his children. and they just wanted more. They're like, well, what happens? What's next? What's next? And she did the same thing, and with a younger child that she knew, and same reaction. So I knew that was good. Now, as far as the idea, yeah, the story and the main concepts and the main sort of themes were in my head, but definitely in sitting down with her, we would discuss how we wanted things to look and how, how did we want it. We really dug down into the specifics of things. So the two children, Atsu and Carwin, we discussed their personalities. How did they interact? How did Tao and Adaima interact? What are their stories? So you kind of create a whole, environment that extends farther than what the story is that we were about to write, and from there we can place them in and sort of know how each one would react in that environment.
That I can see where you guys went with that, and there's one kind of. It feels like you kind of brought two particular themes together, particularly how, as you mentioned, the story, the narrator aspect of it. It felt like almost an African ancestral story.
It sure is.
And but the beauty of it is that because of the robot and all that, you kind of bring in some sci-fi elements. Could you explain what kind of helped you create that mesh? Because we don't often see that kind of combination often.
That was it was an attempt to bring the two together, because there's so many African elements and names. All the names of each of the characters are African names, and with the exception of Carwin, but they're African names, and the words in are African. Alkebulan is the African name or older name for Africa as we know it now. It was known as Alkebulan. So things like that come from an African vein in storytelling. Now, the sci-fi is a form of balancing things out. So you can tell a story, but in order to make it appealing and attractive, you kind of take two things that don't go together and put them together and see how they play and see what happens. And this blended very well in the sense that you do have something that's very sci-fi and very fantastical, along with something that's very traditional and historical. And you take those two and you put them together and you see what happens, and this is what we turned out with.
And another kind of idea and theme, and I'm going to try to keep it as loose, so as I said, people can still want to read it and don't feel like it's spoilers. That we talk about the end of the book. We talk about the wise one in the story, and essentially the kind of story kind of sets up to have people take his place almost with the twins. I was kind of curious as if that was kind of supposed to be a symbol for how you see yourself as a role of a musician, or even just as your role in your life, in terms of you see yourself as helping both, kind of being some type of support for people under you, and kind of foreshadowing and being a part of their steps as they develop.
As far as the story goes, I wouldn't take it to that, but in general, I like seeing people succeed. I like seeing people go to their full potential, and I make an effort to people who have that will in them, because you have a lot of people that don't. You have people that say they want to do things and don't, but anyone that knows me knows that when I see somebody that has something going for them and they need that little, edge, and if I can provide it to them, I definitely do and will.
Okay. And you kind of alluded to it as you described, but I feel like I have to ask out in the most blatant way, if how soon will we be hearing a little bit more from the Alkebulan? I had it right the first time.
Really soon. Really soon. Yeah, my definitely goal is to get more music out there. I think there's types of artists, and to make it pretty much one or the other, you have the types of artists that put out music very frequently, and you have others that don't. and I lean more towards the end of the latter, where I'm always making music, but as far as me presenting music, it doesn't happen very often. So I think going forward, what I'm planning to do is to put out music far more often than I was in the past. So we would definitely hear something in the near future.
Okay. And obviously, our relationship kind of started off on YouTube, and particularly kind of engaging with your YouTube channel.
Yeah.
And I kind of wanted you to kind of give people a little bit of discussion because every time I look at your YouTube channel, I'm just like, this is like an encyclopedia of music equipment and kind of getting into nuts and bolts. So what kind of got you into saying, you know what, that's what I want to kind of present to people on a regular basis?
Uh, YouTube channel actually just, I think anyone who starts a YouTube channel starts it off pretty innocently, especially at the time we would have been on YouTube. That you start with something, you maybe post something, and then all these ideas start happening. YouTube was so new in 2007, so in posting that, I knew that I liked. I was looking for Insonic equipment, which is the primary brand of equipment that I used, and in seeing none, I posted just a little clip on YouTube that turns into another clip and so forth, and then you start having ideas and things that you can do with this new YouTube thing, and as you continue, you gain ideas, and all of a sudden you turn into this channel that gets a little bit bigger than you intended it to, and it just snowballed into this sort of reservoir for older equipment. And yeah, it's still going on. I'm still posting.
Definitely. As you can tell, I'm a big fan of your content, man. Very much.
Thank you.
And I think we kind of covered the gist of the project. I wanted to know if there's any last things that you wanted to say about the project, and any last things you wanted necessarily to say directly to your fans.
This project is something that will definitely open you up to a lot more avenues of art. I'm a musician, but overall, I'm an artist, which means that anything that artists generally look at, just our point of view of looking at things, is to use things creatively, and that ends up being using things, differently than how it might be used regularly. And this is the type of music, when you listen to it, you will most definitely look at things and examine things a different way, just by nature of what you're hearing and how it's going to interact with your brain and the way you interpret things. It will open you up, and that's what I do with anything that I make. That's my end. That's what I aspire to do. Whether it's you listening to another piece of music, whether it's you taking a different route to work, whether it's you considering something, in an alternative way that you wouldn't have regularly done. I think whenever that happens, that's art.
Definitely. Go ahead.
To everyone else, I would just say, have a listen to the album. Go ahead and buy it. It's on Bandcamp. Visit me at www.thedaydreamsound.com.
Definitely. I'll make sure I put a link to your YouTube video here, and definitely I thank you again for taking out your time to sit down and talk to me about your album. Deeply appreciate it, man.
You're welcome. Thank you. Much appreciated.
Definitely. So, have a great evening.
You too, brother. Take care.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye. Bye.